there guys, this is me, Malorian, and this is going to be another video more aimed at new players. Although really for this one now, we're now at the point where this can be for intermediate players or even a little bit more advanced players as well. And this is going to be list pairing. So now that you've gone out there, you decide you love War Machine, you've picked your faction, started making some lists, started playing some games, refining your list, getting into theme lists. Well, now it's time to put two lists together. And I gotta start by saying this is one of the key things that I love about War Machine. The very fact that this game has a two-list system is amazing. And the reason for that is pretty simple, and that's game balance. Now, in other lists, or not other lists, in other games I've played, you know, in 40K, fantasy, whatever have you, it's always one list, right? You go in, you take your one list, you go walk up, and whatever it is what it is. If it turns out you took a bunch of paper and they took a bunch of rock, well, guess how that game's gonna go. You know, skill can always play into it, and the more skillful player always has an advantage. But if you have something that is set up to be the counter to something else, well, when that situation comes up, it's a pretty lopsided game, or at least it should be, given that it's a game that's built more off, you know, not luck and actually having a player influence in the game. And so that's what's so great about this two-list system. The fact that you're coming to the game and saying, you know what, I got these two lists so that if I have, you know, something coming up against paper, well, I'm not going to be dropping my rock. I'm going to be dropping my own paper, or maybe I got my own scissors. And if nothing else, we're going to be getting into the whole theory behind the different ways you can be planning for that and prepping for it and designing your pairings. But if nothing else, that two-list system should be making it so that all those paper rock scissor matchups just don't happen. There just shouldn't be, as long as you're analyzing that pairing correctly and dropping the list that makes the most sense. Now, if you go out there right now and you check the other YouTubes and the other podcasts, there is one phrase which is going all over the place, which is having a pivot and a sweeper. And what this idea is all about is when you're having two lists, what you should really be doing is having one that's your sweeper, which is designed to go out there and pretty much sweep away most competition, and then one that's a pivot so that when you find the thing that's an uh-oh for this first list, then you can throw that in. Now, before I go more into depth into all these things, I'm not going to say that way of doing things is wrong. What I'm going to say is that I don't feel it's the only right way to go, and that there's many other strategies and ways forward. And so what I'm going to do in this video is make sure that you understand at least as many of the different options that I can speak to intelligently, and then you can decide for yourself what's the one that you want to try out. And again, just like how you're going to be developing your own play style and your own lists, the way that you go and set up your list pairing is something that's very personal and individual, and you should make sure that really is something that works for you. So, since I already talked about pivot and sweeper, let's try and get to that one just slightly deeper. And again, I'm not going to spend lots of time on it, because if you go to any other podcast or YouTube channel out there, there's probably, you know, lots of stuff out there. So again, what the idea is behind this pivot and sweeper is that when you have one list, it's going to be a dominant, strong list that is designed to kind of just sweep away 90% of the other lists. This should be your regular go-to list in almost every single situation. This is your power list. And then on the other side is going to be your pivot. So this is something where if you come up against that rock, paper, scissors situation where like, I got one weakness, guess I'm going to have to come over here to my pivot. It's supposed to be something that not only has the same weakness as that strong sweeper list, but also should have as many twists and turns to it. And that's why it's called a pivot. It's supposed to have so many gotchas jam-packed into there, and so many things where like if you don't understand this one interaction, it can get you and it can win the game, so that if you throw that out there and you're really kind of hoping this can do it, you have as many different opportunities where if A comes up or B comes up or C or D, bam, I got this game. And these can be around movement interactions or assassinations or things that shut things down, slugfest scenarios, as many of those little jank pieces that you can fit into there, the better. Now, the whole reasoning behind what this does here is the idea that, first of all, there has to be one dominant list. You have to be able to look at a faction, your faction, and say, this is the power list that's going to be crushing everything else. And as far as that goes, I mean, yeah, that's always a pretty good way to go. As far as that goes, to counter it with saying where there's going to be a pivot, where it's something where it's going to be having as many different ahas and gotchas jam-packed into one thing, I'm not always sure that's really the best way to go. You know, if you are trying to find something that's going to give you a lot of opportunities to find that victory, that totally makes sense. But I want to make sure you understand all the other ways you could go and really pair with it, because really that's going to be it. I mean, I'm going to assume that you want your one list to be a sweeper, something very, very strong. I mean, not many people are going to walk into a game and say, haha, I took 2 crappy lists, let's see how they do, right? You're probably walking into it with your best list and then trying to go from there. So as far as the sweeper part goes, I think that's almost like a no-brainer. You always want at least one really strong list. It's really then come down to what exactly are you going to pair with that. So let's go into some other options and then you can start deciding for yourself. I think the very first thing you can think about as what you're going to be pairing with your A strong list is exactly the opposite. Something that covers all the weaknesses of the first list. Now, let's say, for example, your first list, its real weakness is shooting. You know, it does really well if it gets up there, it can get the alpha, it can punch in skulls and all that great stuff. But man, if it gets shot, it goes down really fast. Well, what you can pair with that is another list which is very strong against shooting. And what that means then is that if you ever face a side where it's like, ooh, they got all the guns, so if they face this one here, that's going to be really bad for me. Well, what I can do now is pull out this other list which has all the opposite characteristics, which now says, all right, you have lists that are good against shooting because you're Signar, Retribution, whatever, you have lots of great guns, haha! Now, I'm not stuck in this paper, rock, scissors situation. I have this other list which is completely designed to counter that. Now, that said, I think already with that type of pairing where you kind of have your A list and then your completely opposite B list can already be run in 2 different ways. Because in one way, you could say it's going to work exactly like I say, where, all right, I'm going to run this really strong list that has a weakness to shooting, and then this other one, and then whenever I see lists with lots of shooting, haha, I now have this. Although I think it's also very practical to say that what that's supposed to do is scare away pairings that are all shooting, but that's not always going to be what you're going to see. A lot of times you're going to be seeing pairings on the other side where one list has guns and the other list doesn't have guns. So you get into a real, you know why they call it list chicken? Is because this right here, where it's like, ooh, you know, this one's good against that one, but it's not good against that, and this one's good as that, but not good against this one. That's what the whole list chicken is all about. So I think what you can also do then is do that A and B list, but where your B is more of a boogeyman. So if I still intend to go with this A list, but this B one is so set up to say like, oh man, if you drop shooting, I'm going to destroy you. And then what happens then is what you're hoping is your opponent sees that and they goes like, ooh, I can't drop my shooting list. You drop your A like you planned, and hurrah. There's always that chance, though, that they're going to go in and call your bluff and drop that shooting one. But, I mean, those are those 2 different strategies where you're taking one powerful list, something that's exactly the opposite, and either deciding to be using one or the other, depending on what you're seeing, or planning to use one regardless, and the other one's just there just to scare them into what you need them to do. Another good example is not just shooting versus anti-shooting, but maybe your one list is just full of jacks. And they're like, oh my god, I have to really drop my hard-hitting stuff so I can just deal with all this armor and all these jacks. But really, the list that you plan to drop is just all infantry. And the more things that you have jam-packed with just fewer models that are really strong, that's great, because now you can swarm over them, go for scenario or whatever your plan is. But those are some examples where you might want to be trying to do something with a boogeyman list, and certainly something that I've done lots of times and had lots of success with. Well, let's also talk about something else. I mean, it's nice to talk about a sweeper, which is a strong list, which is supposed to go out there and dominate, but maybe we should also get into the reasons why. Why is this list so strong, and why is it dominating? And odds are is because it is something that is going to be a strong skew. And what I mean by a strong skew, as I try and turn this off so we're not hearing these notifications, ding, 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 is what I mean by that is that it's a list really pushed to do one thing really, really well. You know, there will be sometimes lists out there where, hey, they do all things really well because that's just the way they're designed. But more commonly, a list that is very dominant is really focused on one thing. And again, because it's a very simple concept, let's say guns. Let's say something like Sloan, where she goes in and says, you know what, I'm going to shoot, and then I'm going to shoot some more. And that's my whole battle plan, is pew, 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 and when I feet, I'm going to pew twice. And that's really it. Just really straightforward. I'm going to shoot you down dead. Well, if we're going with one of these other strategies, let's say if we're going with the pivot version, you might want to take another list that's, you know, has a whole bunch of different small, sneaky win conditions. If we're going with the A and the B, we want to make sure that the other one's the opposite. No guns. If we're going with something that's trying to be the boogeyman, okay, maybe I'm going to be going again with something that says, like, if you come close to me, I'll be very good at killing you, so they want to be trying to stay back, or something along those lines. But here's another way you could be doing this. What if you took another skew list, which was almost exactly the same, but designed to counter the things that might counter you? And what I mean by that is, let's say you have your Sloan list, all the guns, pew, 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 and it's really good at seeing through clouds and seeing through stealth. You take another list that is going to be, let's say, Kane 1, with again a bunch of hunters and a bunch of guns. But what this one does is it has magical attacks. And what you're now setting yourself up for is a powerful skew, and which can go and actually unlock whatever your opponent might be having to counter your shooting. So if your opponent comes in and they're like, aha, I have cloud walls and I have stealth, I can shut down your shooting skew. No, you can't. I have Sloan. Or if they come in, they say, I have wind wall, or I'm Menoth and I have choir. I don't care. I'm going to switch over to your Kane 1. Now, that can be extremely powerful and a very great way to play, because you're really just saying, okay, I have my way of playing, and whereas these other lists kind of force you to play multiple play styles, if you're a person who really only likes one play style, this is just really saying, like, okay, great, embrace that play style, and then depending on what you see, take that tool set that's going to let you counter the counters to your list. The weakness of this, though, however, is that if you ever see anything that is a hard counter to whatever that play style is, so let's say, for example, with that shooting list, if you're up against Rask or Cole Grima, something that just basically says, I don't have anything that shuts down some parts of shooting, I just shut down all shooting. This is a huge big deal, and if you face that, you're in a lot of trouble. The question's going to be then is, how likely are you going to be seeing these things out there that can actually completely counter whatever your skews are? And I think that then moves us into the next type of way where you could be building your lists. Now, let's again start with that one sweeper where you got your one power list, your A list that you really plan to build and use game after game after game. However, you know there are people in your meta that are either going to be a real challenge for this list or just even completely counter it because they're really strong or they just have the pieces to beat it. Your other list might not be designed at watching and covering the weaknesses of your A list. That other list might be completely tailored to beat those people, so that if I see this person, bam, hey, I have this that I know is the kryptonite to the way that you normally play. And I know this way of doing your list building can sometimes be seen as negative because, ooh, like the very idea that you're kind of like building a list to counter a person is now seen somehow as more low as building a list to play against a play style. But really, especially once you start seeing the top tables, it's a very smart way to go. I mean, when you start getting up there and okay, out of these 16 people that normally go into a tournament, these are the 4 that I normally see at the top, and these are the 2 that I really, really am worried about because they're going to be a problem because they're more skilled than I am, or their lists have the answers for my list. Okay, that's great. I'm going to be building a list to beat them specifically. And really, I don't see this as a bad thing at all for multiple reasons. The first reason being that, hey, this is a competitive system with players who go out and bring, specific lists. It should not be bad for me to prepare myself to face the people that I need to beat and to win this tournament. So from that standpoint, I don't think there should be any shame on the player. I think the other way you should be seeing this too is that it actually helps the game develop. If you have a player that has a very strong list, but nobody's ever really teching against it, they're always just building their own list that is like, hey, this is my A and this is my B, or this is my pivot and this is my sweeper, and no one ever goes to specifically go and counter this person who just keeps on winning all the games, well, they're just going to keep on winning all the games and not have to develop their game. So by going and making sure that you're countering the people who are doing the best and winning, you're helping the whole meta to develop, and for those players there that you're targeting to also develop their game as well. So if you have any holdbacks about that style, I really don't think you should be worried about that whatsoever. Now, those are some very competitive ways to be doing list pairing, but there are some other ways you can be going with it as well. I know of several players who have gone into a tournament and say, this is my list that I'm going to be using. That's my A list, my sweeper list, and this list is just something I'm fooling around with. Again, the first one's coming into this saying, alpha, 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 I'm going to win this whole thing. This second way I'm going to be talking about now is more so where you're just trying to gain something from the tournament, which is not necessarily first place. And maybe what that is that even though you can have a list that you can practice and learn about at regular casual gaming, now that it's a tournament and you're having all these players bringing their best, and now you want to see this list that I've been kind of like playing with, how does it do against some people? And it doesn't always have the right times to be dropped, so I'm going to have my alpha list that I'm probably going to drop into those very tough situations, but wherever it's appropriate, I'm going to bring out this trial list and see how it does. Again, there's nothing wrong with trying to do a strategy like that, and it makes complete sense. Another one, if you're going out to a large convention, you might want to look at your list pairing and say, this is a list that's going to be my A list, my sweeper list, and this is going to be a list when I want to win fast. Which again, normally isn't a thing that you want to be thinking about, right? Who cares if you have a list that wins fast? The goal of it is just to win. That said, if you're at a large tournament, a large convention, and you need to have time just to be able to grab some water, to grab some food, just to have a mental break before the next round, it can be very important to have a list to be like, you know what, no matter what list I drop into this person, I probably have an X% chance of winning, but if I do this one, it's going to be a 2-hour game, and if I do this one, it's going to be a 30-minute game. And there's going to be times when it's going to be right to do that 30-minute list. Again, just different ways of building for whatever you're trying to deal with. So I think those are all the main ones I want to be bringing up for this. I think that's like 7 different ways already. So again, if you go out and talk to people and they tell you, you know what, new player, you have to build your list pairings like this, and you might hear one versus the other. Somebody might try and really push sweeper and pivot on you. Somebody might try and really push onto you one list and a counter list, or whatever it is it might be. Think about it for yourself. For yourself, what fits your play style? What are you okay with doing? What are you trying to achieve? And then that's the one you should be trying out first. Again, like I said in the beginning, you might not be doing one of these strategies all the time. You might start with one, find one works better for you, and eventually go to that. Or you might be changing this multiple times just to fit the situation, or just to throw the other players off. Because again, if you do the same list chicken strategy game after game after game, hey, these are people in your local meta that are learning who you are, and if you're doing things like a boogeyman, they'll know like, okay, you're never dropping that. I know exactly what's going on here. So again, make sure you're doing the strategy that works for you. So there you go, folks. If you have any other ideas about list pairing that I didn't cover, please post it down below. If you disagree with anything I said, again, feel free to post it down below. I love having this back and forth with people who either agree or disagree, and we can just, you know, improve the ideas here as we talk to each other. And otherwise, you know, thanks for watching. Bye.